one common myth about human trafficking is that it primarily involves kidnapping by strangers or like shadowy
Mhm.
organizations. But like a lot of what you're saying, these can be older kids in their same private school or
That's right.
whoever. I mean, it could be someone in their family, it could be somebody that they know or their parents know. And I want you to talk about that for a little bit because I think that, about what some of these big misconceptions are and for people to really look out for and know so that they're not, thinking this isn't going to happen to them or their child.
In the major majority of dog or of human trafficking cases, it's actually the trafficking victim who participates in their own abduction. It's somebody that they know. Now, it might be somebody they met online who then
Sure.
sends them a plane ticket to go from LA to New York. We had a case in New Mexico. I can remember the girl's real name. What's her? I can't remember the fake name that we gave her. I'm not going to
Sure.
obviously use her real name,
Yeah.
but the girl was dating somebody from her high school. She was working at a fast food restaurant, but it turned out the boy that she was dating at her high school was actually a recruiter for a trafficker, and so he dated her. Uh, you know, tried to love bomb her and get her to fall in love with him. And then one day said, "Hey, I can't pick you up from work. I'm sending my friend. And he said it was like his aunt or somebody like that, to come pick you up. And so picks her up in a nice car, it's a, convertible BMW. Yeah, we're gonna take you. I'll take you home. Oh, we just need to stop by my house real quick.
Mm.
And so she doesn't think anything of it. And what she didn't know was that the boy that she had been dating was a recruiter for a trafficker. She wasn't the only girl that he was obviously dating and recruiting. He had multiple girls that he was running, trying to bring to the trafficker.
Right.
The trafficker would pay him to do this.
Mm.
The woman whose car that he got in, that was essentially the trafficker's business manager. She took him to the trafficker's house, where the trafficker and her brother engaged in a process that they refer to as seasoning. I'm gonna leave the details out. Horrific
Yeah.
stuff. And then
Mhm.
she spent the next 3 months living in a dog crate. And they would take her out of the dog crate
Oh my
and
God.
sell her and put her back in the dog crate. And there was multiple girls in essentially a dog kennel, in these little individual dog crates. And one of the girls tried to escape, and so the trafficker killed her in a park, and then made all of the other girls watch, and put them back in the dog crates. And then one day, this is a young teenage girl, and she just decided that she'd rather die than live like that, and so she was gonna make a break for it. And she luckily got away. Flagged down a police officer. Police did a phenomenal job. We got involved in the case, helped them figure out who the trafficker was, and he is currently serving 3 life sentences behind bars.
Wow.
So that's the work that we do. But that's a great example of, this was somebody who was in her school, and her friends all knew something was wrong with this guy. Her
Right.
parents knew something was wrong with this guy, but friends and parents have been trying to tell teenage girls that certain dudes are no good for millennia, and it
Right.
really worked.
Right. You wouldn't assume the scale of that problem. Um, Despite the scale of the problem, trafficking convictions seem to be relatively low. You don't hear as much about that. Am I correct on that? I
Yes.
mean,
So there's a couple of reasons for it.
okay.
One, a lot of trafficking cases, we can actually pin the trafficker on money laundering instead of
Okay.
trafficking. And a trafficking carries a minimum mandatory sentence of 15 years. A
Okay.
money laundering charge will get you 30 years.
I
So
see.
the system is really backwards, which is like, there's states like Montana and Florida and Texas. I believe some jurisdictions in California and Arizona as well, where you'll get a life sentence for trafficking of a minor, right? For child trafficking. Unfortunately, that's not at the federal level. We really need to change that. As politicians who are listening to this, like, let's get that law changed. But a lot of times prosecutors will go for the charge that's going to get the heavier penalty. And almost every human trafficker can be hit with money laundering or wire fraud or one of those types of cases. And so oftentimes they'll go for that charge instead of, especially if it's a federal charge, and instead of a human trafficking or a child trafficking charge.
Right. I want to talk about Deliver Fund. Can you explain exactly what you guys do?
Yeah, so in response to all of the experience that I'd had with, seeing what was happening with trafficking when I was at the CIA, I kind of got that, that the road, or the road in the woods that diverged, right? And I had a choice. I could continue to go do the terrorism stuff, or just go into business and try to make a whole bunch of money, or I could try to do something about this problem. And I decided that I had the skills, I had the networks, I didn't have the funds, but I I had a general thesis that we could use the same types of methodologies that we use to fight terrorism, that we could use those methodologies to fight trafficking. And the reason why is because, and I hate to sound crass here and unempathetic, but let's keep in mind tears do nothing for victims of human trafficking. Cold calculating strategy does. And so if terrorism is actually an illicit commodity market, we understand how to fight that. Well, these poor girls who are being sold were commodities
Yeah.
that are being sold on a market. So if we could take the same things that we've learned from the war on terror, and one of the good things about the war on terror is that it lasted decades and we got really, really good at it and we knew what works and what didn't. So if we
Mhm.
could take those same methodologies and apply them to the trafficking fight, then we would probably win. And so that was the thesis for launching Deliver Fund back in 2014. We just crossed our 10-year anniversary in October, and we've been doing it ever since. And we have had levels of success at helping law enforcement, prosecutors, and private companies fight human trafficking, well beyond what we ever thought was possible. To today, not only do we work with over 7,000 law enforcement officers across the United States and any of the 18,000 jurisdictions that have access to our data, the data is really important, and
Yeah.
we have built the largest counter human trafficking database on the planet. And when I say largest, for the nerds like me that are listening, we're pulling in over 65 million data points a month on this issue, primarily here in the United States, a little bit in Europe as well, but primarily here in the United States. Like, that's the scale of the problem. So
Yeah. And I just wanted to go ahead.
we're empowering law enforcement to actually be able to do something about that by giving them direct access to the data. We then train them how to target these traffickers, and then we actually embed analysts within these human trafficking task forces. So we have, as an example, in Dallas, Texas, there's a full-time human trafficking analyst that is working with Dallas Police Department and the general or law enforcement in the general area. That is actually one of Deliver Fund's employees whose salary and benefits and time are paid for by the generosity of donors in the Dallas area. And we're the same thing for Houston, and we're getting ready to do the same thing in a rural county in Montana, and over in Omaha, and actually in uh, just south of LA as well.
Got it. So, in doing some research on this, I just thought this was staggering. According to the International Labor Organization, correct me if I'm wrong with my numbers here, but this is what I found. Over 27 million people are victims of human trafficking globally, generating around 150 billion annually. That's crazy.
Right. Correct. And a lot of that, when you talk about that 27 million, people will say like, "Oh, there's more slaves today than any point in history." Like, that's just not true. But a lot of these statistics are so big
Mm,
that they include things that are cultural in other countries, right? So like child marriage, we consider that trafficking in the United States. In Afghanistan, they don't consider that trafficking. They consider that a Tuesday. Some of what we would consider slave labor in other countries, under our laws, culturally, they don't consider that slave labor.
yeah.
So when we focus on the United States of America, while our law enforcement has problems, we still have the best law enforcement in the world. We have the least corrupt law enforcement system and judicial system in the world. Not to say it doesn't have problems, but it is still the best in the world. And so when we look at what drives that, like the number that you gave, the economic number, you didn't give it in francs, you didn't give it in euros, you gave it in dollars.
Mm.
It's the US dollar that drives the global human trafficking market. So why would we spend an inordinate amount of money to go to Cambodia or Thailand or Vietnam or the Middle East to fight human trafficking, Eastern Europe, when we can do it right here, better, faster, and cheaper, and in a way that is infinitely scalable?
Right. Movies and media often dramatize trafficking in ways that tend to completely misinform people.
Yes.
What is one thing you wish that people, knew was real versus completely misunderstood?
That is a great question. I do a lot of podcasts and I've never gotten asked that question. And that might be something that I just start asking hosts to ask. I would say I would answer that two ways. The first would be what I wish they would understand is that the movie Taken is a complete fiction. Enjoy it for what it is. It's a good Hollywood movie, good action guy movie. Liam Neeson is a great guy with a particular set of skills. Awesome. Enjoy it as the entertainment it is, and don't think that that is has anything to do with reality.
Right.
There was a movie that came out called Sound of Freedom, complete fiction. Enjoy it for the entertainment that it is. Sure, it might be raising a little bit of awareness of what's happening with trafficking in places like Colombia, but that doesn't really apply to the United States of America. And
Mm.
then understand parents, and I'm a parent, so I get this, especially parents of daughters. This phone is the most dangerous thing in your house. And you would be better off to take all the locks off your doors than you would to give your child unrestricted access to this phone. Because this phone will create irreparable harm in your child's life in ways that you won't even know about or understand. And there are no apps. There are great communications companies out there like Bark. I'm a big fan of the stuff that they're doing. Every parent should be using their tools, but those tools are not a replacement for good parenting.
Right.
Fathers, the absolute best thing you can do to keep your children from being vulnerable to being trafficked is to be a good father.
Mm.
Not to go get really good locks and go watch Taken and go take Krav Maga and jujitsu and buy a bunch of guns. Like, none of that matters. Go be a good dad and show your daughter what she's worth. That right there alleviates most of the human trafficking issue. And when we look at the victims of human trafficking, who are they? They're across they're all socioeconomic demographics. I know daughters of some of the wealthiest people in America who have been trafficked. I know some of the poorest people in America whose daughters have been trafficked, and everywhere in between. It increasingly is hitting the upper middle class and wealthy.
Right.
And so understanding that is I think the first step in helping people to understand where the trafficking has come from. It's not the white van with free candy painted on the side of it, right? This is not the 1980s.
Mm.
Trafficking is coming through social media and it's coming through gaming apps. And the phone and the different controlling apps do not have the ability to properly alert you to that. So you have to be a good parent, and you cannot just use the phone as a babysitter because it will eventually catch up.